Morning, everybody. Back online. But I'd like to share with you today some recent research that our team has been conducting with humpback whales. And let's start by introducing you to the diverse team members that comprise our research group. Whale-SETI, and in our case, this is the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, is an interdisciplinary team of researchers with diverse backgrounds, ranging from biology and physics to art and music. And we've all come together with a joint goal to better understand the complexity of humpback whale signals and their potential to provide a model for detecting intelligence signals in the universe. Our team is a culmination of collaborations across 3 major institutions, including SETI Institute, of course, the Alaska Whale Foundation, and the University of California at Davis. And to start, I think we need to ask this first question. Why are humpback whales an important model for decoding the complexity in interspecies communication? And I'll first say that I think a really important point is that whales in general are evolutionarily divergent from humans. In fact, have a last common ancestor of over 65 million years ago, which means that there's been independent convergent evolution of both social and vocal complexity. And this has occurred in vastly different environments. Whales in general also have a long history of brain evolution that outspans our own. Second, humpback whales have an enormously diverse and complex vocal repertoire that are composed of song and social sounds. And just to give you an indication of the kinds of diversity that humpback whales produce, I'll give you a sample. From a disaffiliation ceremony after being bubbling. And it doesn't stop there. In fact, humpback whales are thought to maybe produce just about every kind of sound you've ever heard on the planet. What's interesting too is that that social sounds do show population stability in different populations of humpback whales, while song actually evolves with new units being incorporated all of the time, which means that whales exhibit cultural transmission in these song behaviors. In fact, there's a global distribution of humpbacks with regional cultural diversity, not only in song that evolves and actually gets transmitted globally, but also in other more complex social behaviors. Humpbacks also have the ability to communicate across vast oceanic regions, given the structure of their communication system, which means that messages may need to be interpreted outside of direct contexts. They also show high social complexity, including the breeding displays that many people are aware of, but they also engage in collaborative feeding strategies that require task specialization in multiple dimensions, and even individuals end up with reputations for their skills. And they also show fission-fusion social organization, not unlike what we see in humans and some of our non-human primate relatives, as well as bottlenose dolphins and other species. And finally, they're relatively accessible for a cetacean species because they live along the coast and travel through open oceanic environments. And they exhibit curiosity, playfulness, and friendliness with other non-human species, as well as humans, indicated by some of the bubble rings that they produce and the mugging and spy hopping that they do around whale watching boats. And our approaches to decoding the communication systems of humpback whales are quite similar to those studying other species. For example, we use passive acoustic monitoring, recording of these animals, and trying to link them to behavioral context when possible. We use bioacoustic analysis that involves classification and looking at the structure and organization of these systems. And we think that both artificial intelligence and information theory are going to help us do some of that kind of decoding. And we are applying this to decades of archived humpback whale recordings collected from Southeast Alaska as well as in Hawaii. But what I really want to talk about today is our encouragement of the use of what we are calling engagement, in which we actively interact with individuals of the species under study. And here, of course, is the humpback whale, which can include physical and visual interactions as seen in Hawaii, waters during the breeding season, interest by whales in boats, and other locations where friendly whales approach humans. But we can also engage them using passive acoustic playback, which involves playing back random vocalizations and monitoring the responses of these individuals, as well as doing dynamic adaptive playback, where we actually change those vocalizations in real time. And part of the reason we advocate the use of engagement is due to a concept known as the symbol grounding problem, and a challenge related to this problem called the symbol mapping paradox. And the reason this is that there's a circular nature of trying to ground symbols in the real world. But one signal does not always equal one context. In some cases they do, or multiple signals in multiple related contexts, such as alarm calls. But referential and symbolic signals are often used outside of direct context. So we need approaches that lead to greater understanding of more complex communication dynamics. And while I think AI and information theory can aid here, it may be that listening and finding patterns may not be enough to ultimately translate. So engagement, the reason for engagement. And this notion of engagement was stimulated by a body of work conducted over the past 40 years by investigators working with captive species who probe animals with artificial languages or other interactive contexts like Con and Irene have done, or in order to evaluate the cognitive and communicative abilities in non-humans. And in one set of studies on which I was fortunate enough to participate, Diana Reese provided dolphins with a computer keyboard that allowed dolphins to freely interact to receive objects and activities while being exposed to computer-generated whistles. And I don't have time to go into the study in great detail, but the manner in which these dolphins spontaneously imitated and produced these computer whistles gave us key insights into the units and organization of their whistle communication. And I later used this to develop a quantitative classification technique that we used to take a novel look at the structure and organization of dolphin whistle repertoires with the tools of information theory, where we concluded that could be used to compare the complexity of communication systems across humans and non-human species, without necessarily the assumptions about specific features that comprise language, but rather more universal principles. And Lawrence Doyle will be speaking to those approaches later this afternoon. So it was this in mind, that engagement and mindful participation or probing of other species' communication systems might lead to greater understanding. We opportunistically engaged with an individual humpback in order to, when we went to Southeast Alaska. So we conducted both passive acoustic recordings and playbacks in Southeast Alaska with a specific interest in recording and broadcasting both feeding calls, which I was describing earlier, the complex social behavior that they engage in, that's collaborative, and the diverse repertoire of social sounds, which are more than 40 different sounds that have been determined so far. And in this particular study, we are testing whether one of the humpback whale social sounds, the whoop or the thrup call that you see over here in the spectrogram, was a contact or a greeting call. Our expectation was that if the whoop call does function as a contact call, then we might expect the whales to either physically approach us or respond to us acoustically to provide information about group mates, their location, etc. And in this particular playback session, we used one whoop exemplar from a series of 6 whoop calls recorded in a 90-minute period from an acoustic recording we conducted on a day just prior to the playback session, termed day 1. This exemplar was chosen for the subsequent playback because of its high quality and its potential saliency due to being recorded from the population from the previous day. The following day, we conducted a playback experiment in 3 phases of experimentation with the pre and post periods serving as controls. And as you can see, neither the pre or post periods had any vocalizations present in the recordings. We started the playback much like as most passive acoustic playbacks are conducted, with a relatively random broadcast of the exemplars, 3 in a row here. basically to probe the nearby environment for responders. And to our utter surprise, especially after days of conducting playbacks with no responses, we received a strong whoop response from an individual that was later identified as Twain, a 38-year-old female, as she was the only whale in close proximity to the vessel, producing a very high amplitude whoop in response, and voluntarily remained in the area for the entire playback period. And once this exchange began, we started to conduct the playback more interactively by trying to vary the latency of the broadcast to match that of Twain. And in a conversational type style, she did the same. The exchange consisted of over 30 exchanges during a 20-minute period, which was the playback duration allowed by our permit. So then once completed, Twain followed with a few more whoop calls as she departed the area. And here is a brief example of that exchange caught on audio, video, and hydrophone. Not the best quality call in terms of playback. Yeah, so this went on for 20 minutes until we ceased the playback. And Twain responded 3 more times as she departed the area. So this is a visual representation of Twain's movements around the vessel during the turn-taking exchange. Basically, post hoc, we based on Twain's surface activity collected by blind observers on top of the vessel, we established 3 phases of interaction based upon the surface behavior of the animals and the types of blows that they were producing. So phase 1 we considered to be engagement, where she was producing relaxed blows. Phase 2 we called agitation, for lack of a better term, because she had wheezy blows, and that tends to be associated with more agitation, I suppose. And then phase 3 was disengagement, where we stopped the playback and Twain begins to depart. And for each of phase where applicable, we conducted 2 different types of analysis involving intercall interval, really the only variable that we could examine given the limitations of our broadcasting a single exemplar. The first was to measure the intercall interval, or the latency between Twain's calls, to determine if she changed the rate of calling during the different phases of the playback, as well as in comparison to the whoops recorded on the previous day as a type of control. The rationale behind this analysis is that changes in the rate of calling is associated with arousal and valence in both humans and non-human animals. In a second set of analysis, we also examined the temporal matching of latencies between our broadcasts and those of Twain, which I'll come to a little bit later. Okay, so these violin plots compare Twain's intercall intervals from each playback period phase on day 2, compared to the intercall intervals of the whoops produced on day 1, with day 1 serving as I said, as a type of control. It is also, and what's notable is that the latency for phase 1, labeled engagement again, were significantly shorter compared to either phase 2, agitation, or phase 3, disengagement. And then the second plot simply shows that when all 3 phases are combined, the latency between Twain's calls were still significantly shorter than the stream of calls collected on the previous day. Our second analysis focused on intercall interval, or latency matching, and essentially took pairs of exchanges and calculated the degree to which Twain and we matched each other's latencies between our call exchanges. Thus, if the match was close, exhibiting approximately 10 seconds or 30 seconds each, we would have a ratio that was more even, of 50-50. And if the ratio would reflect, if the ratio was greater, it would reflect a greater disparity at something like 80-20. And that this ratio is represented by this plot. And what we decided is we basically categorized these pair ratios, considering good, close to 50-50 good, and all the others is not. So we made this a binary variable. And what we found with respect to percent latency matching found in phase 1 and phase 2, that logistic regression revealed that phase 1 showed a significantly higher percent matching, with an odds ratio indicating that matching was 10 times greater in phase 1 than in phase 2. So therefore, these results suggest that Twain and we were participating in a simple but likely seemingly intentional communicative turn-taking exchange that might be viewed as a precursor to a conversation between our two species. It also suggests that the latency between or rhythm of calls in humpback whales, as well as other species, may contain salient and meaningful information for communicating. Indeed, rhythm is also hypothesized to be important in the production of humpback whale songs, so we might expect it to play a role in these social sounds as well. So in summary, while we recognize that this particular interaction was extremely limited in scope, this opportunistic event gave us hope that the curiosity and willingness of Twain to exchange with our playback exemplar, perhaps due to the familiarity of the call and what may have been to her an odd context, is representative of others of her species. And our hope is that we can sufficiently develop this interactive playback design to effectively pursue more complex exchanges in the future. And this will include using better equipment and systematically testing different aspects of rhythm, testing other social sounds. As I said, there's more than 40 different types, manipulating sounds in real time, and testing predictions of social sound sequences based on guidance from information theory. We also think exploring other interactive contexts, such as the mugging context that whales do, and bubble ring production that they seem to produce around humans, and a focus on smaller or groups of friendly and willing whales could be quite important to pursue. Yet we also recognize and embrace that interactive playback, or more generally engagement, is only one tool in the network of tools that, when properly integrated with other tools, will ultimately give us insight into the structure, function, and hopefully at some point meaning of communication in humpbacks and other species. And certainly this is exactly the type of conversation we are beginning to have in the next couple of days in this workshop. Thank you.
Do you think if you had said whoop whoop that she might have responded whoop whoop?
Well, that's a good point. Yes, I mean, I think that's exactly the kind of thing that we want to be doing, and that would be a simple, sort of addition to what we were doing in this particular playback. But that's the idea. And also, could we manipulate the calls in real time? Let's say we're doing a playback with an animal, and the animal's responding. Can we grab that vocalization that animal just produced and change it such that either you add a longer component of the frequency rise or more of the growl? And does the animal actually imitate that? Or does it do something different that shows some sort of patterning? So I think that we might be able to use it, with new technologies coming out, we should be able to do those kinds of really dynamic adaptive playbacks where we can get information about the units and what's important to the animals in terms of their perception of their systems.
Is that a question from Zoom?
Yeah. It's been I'm amused in some ways imagining this interaction and thinking that the whale is saying, what the hell are you talking about? and then sort of at the end it says, I'm not talking to incoherent humans.
Well, she stayed around. We were the ones who had to stop, and she vocalized on her way out. So I'm not sure that she left because she was annoyed. But I think it's a good point in that, I think Fred could speak to this better than myself, but I don't think Twain necessarily thought she was talking to another whale. I mean, she was within 100 meters of our boat. There wasn't another whale around where
Mhm.
it's coming from. And the speaker quality wasn't, even though the exemplar was of excellent quality when I recorded it, the speaker didn't put it back out there as you could tell.
Yeah,
It
understood.
gets,
And
it gets, oh, sorry.
I think that this might be stronger evidence for curiosity than anything else, particularly if the signal is inappropriate for context. But an intelligent animal like the whale might very well find this peculiar and curious. The other thing that I worry a little bit about is that as we analyze these signals using various parameters, as you have done, it might turn out that we haven't picked the right parameters to understand the signals. And so in the back of my mind, I keep thinking that we have work to do to figure out what other features of the signals, or I guess we could say utterances, is important for us to keep track of. And that just makes this, as always, a multi-dimensional problem.
Yeah, it certainly does, but I do like to think that this kind of a sort of dynamic interactive playback might give us insights into what's important to them based upon how they respond to the way we tweak. I think we'll get more information about what's important to them than just simply arbitrarily choosing bioacoustic variables, which is somewhat what we do now.
So, I hate to interrupt, we could spend a long time. We have to go on to Julian.
Sure.